In order to manage objects, users, services, workloads in Microsoft 365, you need to have some type of an administrative role. The admin roles are assigned to users or groups, and it can be done from Active Directory, Azure Entra ID in fact, or Microsoft 365 directly. So let's take a look at the MS 365 Admin Center roles. So if I go under Roles, I see Role Assignments, and under Role Assignments I see first of all my suggested roles. Now there are many different roles that exist in Microsoft 365. These roles, some of them are shared to the various workloads such as Exchange or Teams, and they also belong to Azure Active Directory. Azure Active Directory, the identity mechanism that is underlying below Microsoft 365, has all of those roles and manages the assignment of these roles through a technology called RBAC or Role-Based Access Control. Role-Based Access Control is that technology of being able to give a user a role. And then through the rights that are embedded in that role, the user gets access to specific tasks or objects. The roles are a collection of rights, a collection of permissions that are given to whoever is assigned the role. So Microsoft 365 has some pre-canned roles. You can more explore via internet in a details, but roles that are existing that you can leverage, you can use, you can assign those roles to your administrators, to your users, to give them a set of rights. If you learn a little bit more about Azure Active Directory, you realize that you can go into Azure Active Directory and create custom roles, custom collections of these rights so that they can meet the specific needs that you have from an administrative standpoint. However, most organizations have enough with the pre-canned roles, the built-in roles that exist in Microsoft 365. So let's take a look at some of these roles. The biggest role, the one that has all privileges, is the Global Administrator. The Global Administrator can essentially do anything and assign any additional role if a specific task is not already embedded in the Global Administrator role. Be very careful with the Global Administrator role, because whoever has that right is really someone that has no limit to their access within Microsoft 365. That can go as far as reading users' emails, deleting mailboxes, disabling resources, and disabling services altogether for the organization. So there are some very wide impact to having the Global Administrator role. Typically you have an administrator group, a subset of administrators that have those roles, and then you make sure that the user accounts that they use that are part of that Global Administrator group are not the same user account that they use to access their email and access their resources and the data. You don't want them to sign in with that account on a regular basis, but that's only for security best practice. There are others, such as a global reader, essentially someone that can view anything and everything. Sometimes that can be useful if you want to provide that right to a lower-level administrator, but you want to minimize the impact of that person actually making changes. You give them the ability to view everything, but not to change anything. For Help Desk, we have a Help Desk administrator, someone that can manage settings that are related to Help Desk tasks, such as resetting passwords and updating settings for user accounts and managing service requests. And then we can go to specific workloads, such as an Exchange administrator. Someone who is assigned the Exchange administrator role can pretty much do anything that's related to the Exchange workload, but they're unable to do anything outside of that. They have very limited permission outside of that. One role that I find particularly useful is the User Administrator. User Administrator is similar to the Help Desk Administrator. However, User Administrator can create users, manage all properties of users and groups, and so on. Sometimes if I have someone that's in charge of simply users and I don't want them to manage anything related to the other workloads, I'm just going to give them that right. I only have about 8 roles, but in reality there are many roles inside of Microsoft 365 and some of those roles are inherited because I also have Azure and Azure Active Directory and some various complex settings in my Azure Active Directory deployment. But most of these roles here that you see are the built-in roles that you would see in any Microsoft 365 tenant. So I urge you to click on these roles, and if I click on Power BI Administrator for example, I see some of the rights that are embedded in that role as well in the Assign tab. And when I click on Permissions here, I get a little bit more detail about what that role really does as well if I go a little bit higher up in my roles and go look at the Global Administrator. This is where I would be able to assign the Global Administrator role for someone, for example. And if I click on Assign Admins, I would be able to go and add users to any role. So I had Power BI Administrator checked out before, but I can also click on Global Administrator, add the user to multiple roles, and simply by clicking on Add User. And again, we can add users or groups to various roles.